Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kilowatt, a podcast about electric vehicles, renewable energy, autonomous driving, and much, much more. My name is Bodie, and I am your host. And on today's show, we have an interview with some folks from Lead the Charge. Now, if you don't know what Lead the Charge is, that's okay. I didn't know what it was either before they contacted me. Lead the Charge is an organization that puts out an annual report or an annual ranking of the top global EV automakers and how clean or not clean their supply chains are. And as an interesting side note, Tesla made huge gains in this report from 2022 to 2023. They're the only automaker to improve in every category from climate impact, human rights. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, you can go to leadthecharge.org and check it out yourself. I will say they have a very informative website. All right, let's get to our guest introductions. We actually had three folks from Lead the Charge. And Lead the Charge is an organization that is made up of members of several other organizations. So we have Katherine Garcia, who's the Director of Clean Transportation for the Sierra Club. We have Cecilia Mattea from Transport and Environment. She is the Battery and Supply Chain Policy Manager over there. And finally, we have Chris Alford, who is the Senior Strategist on the Auto Supply Chain Program for the Sunrise Project. All right, having said all that, let's go ahead and welcome everyone to the program. Let's start by having everyone introduce themselves so that the audience can learn whose voice is whose. And let's start with Chris.
Sure. Hi there, Bodie. My name's Chris Alford. I'm based out of Mexico City, originally from the UK, but I've been living in Latin America for about 12 years. And I work with an organization called the Sunrise Project, which is a global organization focused on climate justice and accelerating, in particular, corporate action on the climate crisis. And I'm a senior strategist on the auto supply chain program within our broader program on global clean corporates. Great to be here.
Oh, nice to have you, Chris. Thank you. And then, Katherine, can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. Hi, I'm Katherine Garcia. I am based in Washington, D.C., and I work for the Sierra Club, which is a grassroots organization that has chapters all over the country working to ensure that we have a healthy planet and are enjoying the outdoors. I lead the Clean Transportation for All campaign, which is focused on reducing pollution from the transportation sector.
Excellent. Thank you very much and welcome. Cecilia, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Cecilia Mattea. I work for Green NGO Transport and Environment. We are a Belgium-based organization, so I'm calling in from Brussels. And I'm the Batteries and Supply Chains Policy Manager. So my role at Transport and Environment, or TNE, is to make sure that the raw materials that we need for the transition are sourced responsibly, and the role that policymakers and regulation can play in this. And TNE, more broadly, we work on decarbonizing transport. So we work on cars, trucks, but also aviation and shipping.
Okay. Do you do trains at all? Is that counted under shipping?
We also have a team working on trains. So trains in Europe, they're mainly electrified. So not so much the decarbonization aspect of it, but more the accessibility and affordability element. So how to make train travel better for consumers in competition with aviation, of course.
So I really like Lead the Charge. I like the mission for Lead the Charge, which is at its core, all vehicles made equitably, sustainably, and fossil free. So I really like that. Can you tell me, and anybody can take this question, but can you tell me a little bit more about Lead the Charge because it's not really an organization, it's a group of organizations.
Yeah, I can take that. So Lead the Charge is a network of organizations based around the world working together for about 2 years. It's global because the manufacturing of vehicles is global. And our vision is to achieve a sustainable automotive market. So this network is made up of a lot of different organizations with expertise in climate, environmental justice, human rights, indigenous rights, and heavy industry. And this is really the first time that project has come together. I think it's been really successful to get the conversation started about why we need a sustainable automotive market.
And then let's talk a little bit about the Lead the Charge Leaderboard, which is not specific. Like you're not looking at ICE cars; you're looking at EVs. Is that right?
Yeah, so the focus of the leaderboard is really looking at the opportunity that the EV transition presents, which we fully support, as also an opportunity to address issues that have plagued automotive supply chains for decades. So really looking at, as automotive supply chains are being transformed to serve the EV transition, how can we transform these so that they are also free from fossil fuels, and then also address many issues to do with environmental devastation and human rights issues that have happened along ICE vehicle supply chains for many years. In terms of the leaderboard itself, we select automakers that are currently leading the transition to electric vehicles to evaluate. So in that sense, yes, we do focus on EV manufacturers. And the reason for that is because we think that automakers who are leading the transition to electric vehicles are going to be the biggest automakers in the future, because EVs are the future. But in terms of the actual analysis of companies, because there are some companies in there that produce both EVs and ICE vehicles, we look at their policies that cut across all of their vehicles. So the way that we analyze EVs is more to do with how we select companies. And then in there are some companies like Tesla that only produces EVs, and BYD that produces nearly only EVs. And then others like Ford and GM, which haven't made as much progress, but are still starting to accelerate their transition. And with the ones that produce both ICE vehicles and EVs, we look at their policies that cut across both of those.
Okay, so, and I'll give this one to Cecilia. When you're looking at, or when, not you specifically, but when the organization is looking at what kind of factors to evaluate and grade these companies on, how are you? That seems like a lot. I read in the document there's like 80 different factors you're grading on. How are you, getting the information? Is this self-reporting from the automakers? Are you looking at their suppliers? How is that going into play? Because it's a very detailed document. You have like an 83-page document, and then you have another document that tells you how, or tells people how they actually, set up to grade this whole process. So there's a lot that goes into this. Can you just give us a brief explanation of how that works?
Yeah, sure. To the rest, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. So basically, we outsource the research to an independent group called PIRC, PIRC. And they look at, the criteria is to basically look at material that has been board approved by the company, basically, so that to make sure that it's not just a random press release or just a random announcement without any leadership backing at the company itself. Then once this first research is done, according to all of these indicators, as you said, Bodhi, we internally, so each groups with the different expertise reviews a little bit the analysis, and we contribute based on our own research and like what we see out in the world. So for example, at Transport and Environment, we're experts on batteries. We've worked extensively on battery regulation, have engaged with companies in the automotive sector, but also battery makers and mining companies. So, and recycling companies, of course. So we know what the state of the art is like. So we are able to, let's say, fact check also on our end in case anything is missing from the work that PIRC has done.
Excellent. One of the things that I found really interesting in the document was, in the Lead the Charge document, was that in Indonesia, close to 49% of the world's nickel is made and processed there. And in one industrial park in Indonesia, the coal power capacity is equal to Mexico, which I thought was insane, just in one industrial park. So there's definitely, and then there's a bunch of other environmental factors that goes on there as well. There was some things in the document that talked about green steel or clean steel. Can you tell folks what clean steel is or green steel?
I can start us off on clean steel, and then pass over to Katherine and Cecilia that have also been working on this. I'd say just to start off that we prioritize three key supply chains. So we're looking at steel, aluminum, and batteries. And there's a bunch of different reasons for this. On the first hand, because they make up the most weight of the car. So they're like very important components, in particular, of course, of EVs. Secondly, there was a very interesting study that came out that was commissioned by Polestar and Rivian that looked at supply chain emissions of electric vehicles and found that actually just these three components make up around 70% of the supply chain emissions of EVs. So they're very important to reduce these upstream scope 3 emissions of electric vehicles. And then finally, also because of the leverage that automakers have over these industries. So when we lead the charge, on the one hand, it's a campaign about the electric vehicle and the automotive industry. But really as well, it's also about how can we use automakers and in particular the EV transition as a lever to push forward change on climate, environment, and human rights issues on other industries, and in particular, these heavy industries, steel, aluminum, and batteries. And when we look at steel and aluminum, these are often called like hard to abate industries that have made very, very little progress on decarbonizing. And we think that a key piece of the puzzle that needs to be unlocked in order to incentivize these companies and these industries to accelerate their progress on decarbonization and introduce new technologies that will enable them to do that will be showing demand from their key customers. So aluminum, for example, automakers are the largest consumer of aluminum in the world. So the biggest customer of aluminum companies. When it comes to steel, they are not the top, but they are one of the most important consumers because they consume primarily high grade, expensive steel, high quality steel that is at the moment made in blast furnaces powered by coal. So when we're talking about green steel here, there's when we're talking about the green steel that the automotive sector needs, it's about finding new technologies that can allow the steel industry to transition away from these coal-powered blast furnaces, and also meet the quality requirements that automakers and vehicles need from their steel suppliers. And so there's a few different routes to achieve this. The most promising one at the moment, and there was actually some very interesting announcements you may have seen this week from the Biden administration on this, and I'll hand over to Katherine to talk more about that. But is what's called a direct reduced iron process that can be fed with clean hydrogen. And there was one project announced on this with their Swedish-based firm SSAB. That'll be actually building the first green steel facility in the US. And I'll hand over to Katherine to talk a little bit more about the US context on that front.
One of the things I wanted to bring up, echoing Chris, was that as one of the largest consumers of steel, the automotive industry has a responsibility to publicly declare that they have a commitment to buy the best steel out on the market. And we are really pushing the steel industry to move forward with green steel. Right now, the U.S. government is investing, and steel mills have the opportunity to retrofit their facilities with new equipment that would dramatically reduce and potentially eliminate fossil fuel usage entirely. So this is a key moment for this industry to move forward on green steel. And we are using Lead the Charge as a lever to make sure that steel mills are being leaders in this space, and demonstrating this preference for climate-friendly steel over metal that is available now in the market. So this is a key opportunity to be pushing forward. And as Chris mentioned, the Biden administration is really showing that this is a priority for investment right now.
That leads us to the human rights side of this, which I don't think is covered as often and probably as it should be. Right now, or not right now, every year, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, it's an order of nuns, they put forth a proposal at the Tesla shareholders meeting for Tesla to be more transparent when it comes to child labor. And that's always shot down, like always. Tesla's board recommends against it, and it's shot down. I don't know how that survives the media, but it does. Talk a little bit about the human rights when it comes to sourcing this material and making sure these automakers are sourcing responsibly.
I can take that. So I think that, well, first of all, we need to take a step back and look at, as Katherine said, this is a great opportunity to clean up supply chains, right, as we transition to electric vehicles. But these problems, they're not unique to the electric vehicle supply chain, but they are for all extractive industries, right? So, the problems of human rights abuses, let's say, they're also present heavily in fossil fuel industry and the fossil fuel supply chains. So now there is this unique opportunity, and we're seeing, for example, here in the EU, with new laws coming in to actually improve disclosure, but also accountability of companies as to what happens in their supply chains. An example of a law that I've worked on is the European battery regulation, which basically mandates, in very simple terms, it mandates companies that are placing batteries on the European market to make sure that their supply chains are free of human rights abuses, including child labor, but also forced labor, and environmental abuses. So companies will have to demonstrate that these things are not present in their supply chains. This is massive because it impacts the supply chains of cobalt, nickel, lithium, and graphite. But to really make this work at a global scale, we also need other geographies, such as the US, such as South Korea, Japan, other leading EV markets, to take up similar laws to really have an impact globally on automotive supply chains. So progress is being made, and I think companies are doing quite a lot, and that's why we are ranking them. And if you compare the rankings from last year to this year, especially Chinese automakers, for example, they are making some progress on human rights indicators, but it's not enough because all of them, on average, they're below 50%. So there's still a lot they can do.
Yeah, and I do want to chat about that in a second, but talking about the battery sourcing material and recycling, in the report, it says that only 5% right now of batteries are being recycled, and everything else is, going through this pyrometallurgy or hydrometallurgy processes. Can you talk about that a little bit? That I was under the impression that we were ramping up all these recycling centers so that we wouldn't have to have these problems, but evidently not.
Well, I can talk broadly, and then maybe Katherine or Chris can talk about the US context. But so the good news is that batteries in EV vehicles, they're lasting longer than we originally thought, right? So they're staying on the road longer, and then we're exploring all of these opportunities around a secondary life. So how can we still reuse these batteries? So what's happening, or what will happen, is that the biggest chunk of these batteries will come in to be recycled towards the end of this decade, early 2030s, basically. So as you said, Modi, there's a window of opportunity right now to build a good recycling industry in Europe, in the case of Transport Environment, so where I'm based, right? We want to see this happen in Europe, but also elsewhere, to really push for those, to really have a more circular ecosystem to drive down demand from primary mining. But as you rightly pointed out, there are different ways of recycling, and today a lot of them they're based on very energy consuming. They also have fossil fuel as part of their methods, and most of it goes to Asia. So there is that opportunity, but we need to be quick about it with strong industrial policy.
Katherine, do you have anything to add on that?
It's similar in the United States. The Biden administration has made this a priority and is really studying how to make this a circular economy. And also some states, New Jersey, for example, just recently passed a standard to push forward and make sure that we are looking at EV battery recycling. And so I think these are key moments to be ensuring that we have the infrastructure to as Cecilia said, making sure that these are recycled properly to reduce the need for additional mining. And I think we have some time before I think we have some time to make progress, but this is a key priority for the space.
Excellent. So let's talk about the automakers in general. Of the 18 automakers, Cecilia, you mentioned this, no one had a score over 50%, which leaves a lot of room for improvement. But the automakers did score full marks. Some automakers scored full marks in certain areas. Is there a world where these automakers can work together and improve their scores?
Sure, I could take this on. I think that would be an ideal world. So I think you mentioned one of the most interesting findings of the leaderboard analysis this year was that if you look at the level of individual automakers, they're doing pretty poorly across the board. There's definitely been momentum and signs of improvement from some automakers, some more dramatic than others, such as in particular this year we saw significant improvements by US automakers such as Tesla, Ford, and GM. But none of them have now even reached the 50% mark. And just to give a little bit of context of what we mean about automakers meeting 50% or 100%, what this leaderboard analysis does is it looks at both what companies say they want to do. So it looks at companies' targets, commitments, policies, and so on. But it also looks at concrete evidence of their progress towards meeting these targets, commitments, and policies. So it also looks at implementation as well. And specifically, the benchmarks are aligned with international benchmarks. So on the climate side, for example, we're looking at whether automakers are driving forward they're setting targets and then taking action to drive forward the decarbonization of their supply chain in a way that's aligned with a 1.5 degree pathway. And then on the human rights side, for example, we're looking at international human rights standards and frameworks and seeing whether automakers are committing to them and then taking action to fulfill those commitments. So when it comes to doing that, they have not a single automaker has passed the 50% mark. But when you look at the industry as a whole, and one analysis we did was to look at the best score against every single indicator and then sum up all of those best scores. And that leads to a score actually of over 70%. So that basically what that means is that if an automaker wanted to dramatically increase its score and improve its performance across all of these different areas, all it would need to do to get to a score of 70% is to look at what its competitors who are leading on those particular issues are doing. So, for example, Volvo at the moment is the leader on clean steel and aluminum and is doing a lot of very interesting things on that, signing purchasing agreements, setting very ambitious targets, doing a lot of work around steel and aluminum recycling. And so they could be an automaker to look to if another automaker wanted to improve its score on that. When it comes to human rights, for example, Ford is doing particularly well when it comes to responsible transition mineral sourcing. So another automaker could look to Ford for inspiration on what it could do about that specifically. And then that also leaves the question, of course, about what about this final 30%? And that's really where we're going to need leading automakers to step up and show innovation and do things that no one else in the auto industry has done before them. And a really good example this year was actually came from Tesla. So one of the indicators that we measure automakers against is around disclosure and calculations of their scope 3 emissions, and then specifically their upstream scope 3 emissions that come from their supply chain. And so we have a general indicator that looks at whether automakers calculate this for their supply chain overall. And that's where quite a few automakers have made progress. But we think that if automakers really want to get serious about tackling emissions from their steel, aluminum, and battery supply chain specifically, then they need to be calculating exactly how much emissions are coming from each of those supply chain and disclose disaggregated emissions. So say that this is how much emissions come from our steel supply chain, this is how much emissions come from our batteries, and this is how much steel emissions come from our aluminum. And really, it's only with that they'll be able to measure how effectively they're making progress towards decarbonizing these supply chains. And in 2022, not a single automaker had done that. It was everyone scored 0 across the board. This year, Tesla became the first automaker to provide that level of disclosure with regards to their Scope 3 emissions. And so now they are the leader in that space that other automakers can be looking towards. So it's examples like this which will help us to close that 70% and hopefully in the upcoming years get all the way up to 100% in terms of at least one automaker fully meeting all of the indicators.
Yeah, recently Tesla, and I'm fuzzy on the details, so don't quote me on this 100%, but they basically set up like a blockchain for supply chain to report this stuff, and GM signed on, and one other major automaker signed on. Do you think this is due to the Leaderboard report, or how? I guess a better question would be, how are automakers reacting to this report? Are they working with you on this? Are they looking at it? How do you know? How are you getting feedback?
Yeah, this is a great question, Bodhi. And this is probably the thing that is most exciting about this coalition space. We are engaging with many of the manufacturers. We are sending the preliminary findings of the study to each manufacturer. We've developed relationships with many of the manufacturers and are sending them findings in advance, meeting with them, getting feedback, and making sure that they are really taking this opportunity to discuss what we're finding and what the entire industry is moving towards. Many of these conversations have been really helpful for sharing information that we're finding in the industry, best practices. And so this is a great way that we're seeing a lot of movement. And I think this is the best way to indicate progress. As Chris was saying, we are, because this is kind of the first time that some of these teams are having these discussions together, meeting with a variety of different groups that have an interest in the supply chain and overall automotive industry. I think we're really coming to the table with really helpful information, and we're seeing the progress of that.
Cecilia, did you have something to add to that? I thought I saw you wanting to talk.
No, maybe I want to expand on the example you brought in around the blockchain, because it's also one of my areas of work. So basically for people that are listening, this is a way to track and trace minerals or other things in the supply chains of automakers. Something that happens in the cloud, whatever that is. And basically, this is a very useful technology to provide us with movements, right? And the geographical indication of a given, let's say, for example, of lithium, that it's being sourced from Chile and then goes to China for processing and in a battery cell, and then the battery is made in Europe. So we know where this is going. But what I want to highlight maybe to those that are listening is that these technologies alone aren't enough. And that's why you also need things like the Lead the Charge report and other great work that NGOs around the world are doing to show or indicate, what other things are happening, for example, in Chile or in China or in Europe around that factory, because this is what a so-called due diligence process is about. And that companies, on the other hand, shouldn't just rely on that geographical indicator, that track and trace system, but also interview different types of stakeholders, from workers, for example, to impacted communities.
Yeah, and we should say, if anybody doesn't know what a blockchain is, it's basically a ledger. Like people used to have checkbooks, and they would write down everything they spent, and they could write a note. This is not a tech podcast, but I feel confident that most of the folks know what a blockchain is. But in the off chance they don't, I'm going to each of you have your own separate discipline. So I'm going to start with Katherine. I want to end on a positive here, not on a negative. But Cecilia, do you want to? Where do you feel in your discipline and what you cover? How can automakers improve?
Yeah. So in the next couple of years, So earlier in the podcast, I mentioned there are a couple of European laws that have now entered into force. But as of next year, mid-2025, we will see these rules go into force. So automakers right now, they are preparing to meet these requirements on environmental and human rights sustainability. So it's an incredibly fascinating moment and like a really important moment to see how will they implement these rules and how will they make positive change happen on the ground, working in collaboration with their suppliers. Because this isn't something that we've mentioned a lot, but that it's super important. Automakers need to work with their suppliers to better understand their supply chains, the impacts that they're having. And earlier in the podcast, you mentioned nickel, Bodhi, for instance. So nickel mining has a huge impact on biodiversity. And biodiversity is one of the things that automakers are being asked to look at under this new European battery law. So there, right, they will have to assess the biodiversity impact, monitor it, but most importantly, mitigate it. So that to me is really the positive story that I'm looking forward to.
Excellent. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, so I would hone in on two. One where I think there's already a lot of momentum, which has been very encouraging to see, and another where there's a lot of work to do, but I think a lot of opportunity for an improvement. So the first one is around automakers starting to use their leverage in order to support the decarbonization of the steel and aluminum industries. So in the first year of the Leaderboard, which we published back in 2022, this was basically a non-existent issue for the auto industry and for EV manufacturers as well. So we saw that over around 3/4 of the automakers that we evaluated scored 0 on all of those indicators. And this year, actually, the story about that has flipped. So now the automakers who aren't doing anything with regards to taking action to decarbonize their steel and aluminum supply chains are now in the minority. And around 2/3 of automakers on steel, at least, and on aluminum, actually, a little bit less, have started to at least take initial actions on decarbonizing the steel and aluminum industries. So now we're starting to see real momentum on this issue. And what we'd really like to see moving forward is automakers sending very strong public demand signals to the steel and aluminum industries that tell them that the way that the auto industry is going in the future and the way that EVs will be built in the future is with fossil-free steel and aluminum. How can they send those demand signals? There's a lot of things they can do. They can use their voice, speak up publicly in forums, tell their steel and aluminum suppliers that we're moving towards green steel and green aluminum. If you can't keep up, we will drop you as suppliers. They can send demand signals with regards to how much steel and aluminum they want to buy. So they could set targets, for example, with regards to that we want to supply X quantity of near zero emission steel and aluminum by 2030. There are some very interesting multi-stakeholder initiatives that are actually allowing automakers to come together and other downstream buyers to come together to send these demand signals and bring them together and send a collective signal to these industries. So, for example, there's Steel Zero. The First Movers Coalition by the World Economic Forum has groups on steel and aluminum. And in the US as well, RMI has recently put together a purchasing platform where steel and aluminum, where downstream buyers can come together and help to get to use their purchasing power, to help get these facilities built. And then that brings me down to the third point, which we also really want to see automakers working directly with suppliers to help unlock investments in new facilities or in relining or upgrading existing facilities which require huge investments. And for those investments to become a reality, investors need to have the confidence that the demand will be there. And so one way that automakers can do this, and that they've started to do, is to sign offtake or advanced purchase agreements directly with facilities. So, for example, just to give one example, Volvo has signed an agreement with a facility in Sweden that isn't even operational yet, called the Hybrid facility by SSAB. Basically says that they will start buying the steel as soon as it's ready, as soon as it'll be made available. And that's the kind of agreements that we want to be seeing moving forward. And then the second area, I would say, which has been a very disappointing area of the leaderboard so far, but is one where we're hoping to see more improvement, is around the issue of Indigenous people's rights. And so there, it's kind of like where steel and aluminum was last year, but it continues to be there, and that it's pretty much a non-existent issue for most of automakers. But this is going to be so crucial to address as the EV transition accelerates, because around 50% of the minerals that we need for the energy transition are located on or near Indigenous people's territories. And so it's fundamental that automakers start taking action to ensure that their suppliers who are getting these minerals are respecting the self-determination of Indigenous peoples. And at the moment, around 70% of automakers score 0 on Indigenous people's rights. There's some glimmers of hope. For example, Tesla made some very interesting progress this year on Indigenous people's rights and some of their policies and practices, but there's still a long way to go. And we are hopeful to see progress on this next year. Some members of Lead the Charge are engaging directly with automakers, holding workshops, providing advice on how to build stronger Indigenous rights policies and processes to uphold those policies. So we're hopeful that all of this work will start bearing fruit next year.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And then, Katherine, same question. Where do you see need for improvement? And then what are you hopeful about in 2024?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I wanted to raise here. So in the U.S., there were some newly adopted federal vehicle emission standards that were just announced last week. These are long-term standards that are requiring automakers to make cleaner cars, and this will help ensure that car manufacturers are actually improving their scores when it comes to manufacturing more electric vehicles. This is also coupled with 13 states plus DC have stronger standards than the federal government. So we'll be seeing even more electric vehicles in those states. And that will help the overall score for electric vehicles. The other thing I wanted to mention, which was quite historic this week, was that the Department of Energy announced funding. It was $6 billion, which is the largest investment in industrial decarbonization in history here in the U.S. This funding came from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're seeing a number of projects that will get funded specifically to reduce emissions around the production of aluminum and steel. And so this is quite exciting for our work, because we know that a cleaner supply chain is on the horizon.
Excellent. I don't normally at the end I let everybody plug something. I don't know that plug is the right word here. So if someone wants to find you, Katherine, or wants to learn more about what the Sierra Club is doing, where would they go? Or even lead the charge?
Yeah, for Sierra Club specifically, they can go to our website, sierraclub.org, and learn about the clean transportation work that we're doing, and as well as the industrial decarbonization work we're doing. There are multiple teams that I work closely with. And then for Lead the Charge, check out the Lead the Charge leaderboard, and a lot of really great content there.
Excellent. And how about you, Cecilia?
You can check out Transport and Environment on social media, so LinkedIn, X mainly, but also Instagram, and of course our website to learn about not just cars, but other cool stuff such as aviation and shipping.
Okay, and what's the website?
transportenvironment.org.
Got it. Thank you. And how about you, Chris?
So the Sunrise Project have our website as well, sunriseproject.org. But yeah, I'd really encourage people to check out the Lead the Charge website, which is leadthecharge.org. And yeah, have a look through the leaderboard, have a look through some of the solutions we're proposing that are being implemented already. So they are feasible, and really help us to send these messages to the auto industry about using their leverage to help address these issues across steel, aluminum, and battery.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming in and joining us. I really appreciate it. I think this was very informative, and hopefully next year, if you enjoyed yourself this time, you'll come in next year and give us an update. All right, that was a great interview. I would like to thank Katherine, Cecilia, and Chris for coming on and being so generous with their time. I learned a lot from this interview, and I hope you learned a lot as well. If you would like more information on what they're doing, I'll put links in the show notes to their respective organizations, and I will also put a link to Lead the Charge as well in the show notes, so you can go and look that up. I would highly encourage you to do it. Like I said in the intro, there is a lot of information on there, so if you're curious about this stuff, and I know we have people that listen to the show that are curious about this stuff, go check it out for sure. All right, everybody. That is it for me this week. I do want to remind you, I have a new podcast out. It's called Beyond the Post. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. On Beyond the Post, Rob Dunwood and I sit down and we talk about being a digital creator, how to get started. Season 1 is really focused on new creators, somebody who hasn't started before. However, I do think you can find nuggets if you are currently a creator. So go check out Beyond the Post. I'll put a link in the show notes. I am really proud of the work Rob and I did on that first season. It was a lot of work. We started in October and we put out our first episode in March. So it was a long road. All right. What else? Oh, we have that contest. If you would like to win a Kilowatt mug, all you have to do is go subscribe to NosillaCast, send me a screenshot that you're subscribed, and I will put you in a drawing to win a Kilowatt mug. I will buy the mug. I will send you the mug. It will be 100% free to you. All right, everybody, that is it for me this week. If you would like to email me, it's Bodie, Bodie, at 918digital.com. You can also find me on X at 918digital. I hope you all have a wonderful and safe weekend, and I will talk to you on Tuesday.